Okay. So we're here on Daf Lamed Daled, and the Gemara attributed our Mishnah, which is on Daf Lamed Gimel and Beis, to Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Meir has a case of Bavas Achas, where it's both Shabbos and Yom Kippur. So we had a whole list of Isurim that he violated, which were Isurei Achila. Quickly reviewing that list, we had Chelev, then we had Kodshim, Betumas Haguf, and then we had Kodshim itself is an Isur Me'ilah. And in all these cases, we had either what's called an Isur Kolel or an Isur Mosif. Like, for example, in the case of Kodshim, because of Tumas Haguf, we expanded it from Chelev to include the entire animal, all the basar of Kodshim. That's called an Isur Kolel, by extending the objects on which you chal. And then we had here an Isur Mosif, which means it's inherently a different kind of an Isur, because we started with Chelev, which is an Isur Achila, and then by adding Kodshim into the equation, we upgraded it to an Isur Hana, and that's Me'ilah. That he gets he's Chayv and Sham Me'ilah. Then, and the last of the four was Nosar. Now, Nosar becomes an Isur Mosif, because we go from Gavoa to Hedjot. And now Rabbi Meir adds Yom Kippurim and Shabbos. So let me just make the cheshbon again. We have, tell me if this calculation is correct. We have 3 Isurei Achila, 1, 2, 3, plus we have Me'ilah. So what's the 4th Isur Achila is Yom Kippur. Correct? Let's go over it one more time. Chelev, Kodshim B'tumah, Me'ilah, Nosar, and Yom Kippur. All told 5. The only thing is that 4 out of the 5 generate a chiyuv chatos, and Me'ilah generates a chiyuv Asham, Sham Me'ilah. Now, Reb Meir adds a 6th chiyuv, and that's Shabbos. Now, what kind of Isur Achila applies to Shabbos? The Gemara says that he was carrying something in his mouth from a Rishus HaYachid into a Rishus HaRabim, and that's called a violation of Lefas Hotzah. And we said that B'dvar Machal it's considered Derech Hotzah, and therefore he's Chayav Chatos for Shabbos. Now he's not Chayav for Hotzah on Yom Kippur, right? Because there's no Isur Hotzah on Yom Kippur, according to this opinion. That's, I think, a Machlokes Beitza, and increases. But anyway, we're holding now, according to Rabbi Meir, that there's no Isur Hotzah on Yom Kippur. In that sense, Yom Kippur is like a Yontiv. So Amru Lo, the Chacham turned to Rabbi Meir and say, Enu ben Hashem. We're talking about Isurei Achila. And Rabbi Meir holds that this Hotzah in this case is an Isur Achila, because he's only Chayav for Hanocha. And when is the Hanoch? The Hanoch is b'shas Blia, when he swallows it. So at that moment, he violates Yom Kippur and Shabbos with Meleches Hotzah, and that's a case of B'vas Achas. So the thrust of Rabbi Meir's adding Shabbos is to teach us that Isur Chal al Isur B'Isur B'vas Achas. And the only question that we had yesterday as we completed the sugya, is why does the Gemara feel compelled to quote Rabbi Meir? We had already, we had already Rabbi Yossi, right? What did Rabbi Yossi say? Rabbi Yossi said that Yechayv Shtayim, even in the case of Masechet. Again, it might be dependent upon the Machlokes Shin Rabbi Chia and Bar Kapara, but in any event, that's a problem that we didn't solve. We looked a little bit here in the Yalkabirim, but we didn't fall. So what we're up to today is Rabbi Meir. Let me see if we can find this. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is 7 lines down from the top. Yeah? On Daf Lamed Daled. So the Gemara clarifies this. Again, we have our Mishnah where the sisters got mixed up at the time of the Knisa L'Chum. And we calculated 4 chatos, right? Because we added Eishes Ish, and we added Achos Ishto, and Eishes Achiv, because they were 2 brothers, correct? And then we added Nidl. So now the Gemara is going to focus on a slightly different dimension of the sugya, which is called Tav B'dvar Mitzvah. And again, we proved at great length on Amud Aleph that we're talking about a case of Shogeg. Shogeg is the same as Toa, so he made a mistake. He had a relationship with the wrong sister. So Gemara asks, are you chayav a chatos in this case when your intention was to be mekayim the mitzvah of the su'e isha, marrying a woman, and instead you violated these 4 arayos? Says Aliba the man. Aliba the Rabbi Yeshua, ha'amar tav b'dvar mitzvah pot. But we're talking here about how to pile up for you chatos. And then we got to the number 4, or maybe you're going to Rabbi 5, plus the Asham Me'ilos. But Rabbi Yeshua says that Torah Dvar Mitzvah, you don't have to bring any korban. And this is Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Lamed Zayin. And that's the shita of Rabbi Yoshua. Now, Rabbi Eliezer in the Gemara in Shabbos disagrees with Rabbi Yoshua, and the case is Mila, right? That's the pair called Rabbi Eliezer the Mila. And he's got 2 babies to circumcise. One is a Friday bris, which means that Shabbos would be the 9th day of since this baby's birth. And the other baby is a Shabbos bris, which means that Shabbos is the 8th day since the baby's birth. And now he went ahead and he circumcised the wrong child. He circumcised the 9-day baby. The baby whose bris was meant to be before Shabbos, and he was mal on Shabbos. So he violated the Shabbos, but he was osek b'dvar mitzvah. He was tav b'dvar mitzvah. Now, even Rabbi Eliezer, in that case, seems to assume that you're potter. What is the case that divides Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua? He has 2 babies to mal. One is on Shabbos a 7-day baby, which means that its Mila was meant to be on Sunday, and the other was a Shabbos, a Mila. Now he goes ahead and he does a Mila Kodem Zmana on the baby whose Mila was meant to be on Sunday, and instead he circumcise the baby on Shabbos. And in that case, Rabbi Yeshua says, look, he's still considered Tav B'dvar Mitzvah, and he's potter. But Rabbi Les says, no, in this case, he's Chayim. Why? Because he did not implement a mitzvah of milah. In the case where the baby was meant to be circumcised on Friday, and instead he violated the Shabbos and circumcised him on Shabbos, but at least the milah is a milah kshera. So you could say that he was an osek b'mitzvah. He was tov b'dvar mitzvah. Toch k'dei hit asku tov b'mitzvah. He violated the Shabbos. But in the case where the baby was a Sunday baby, and now Shabbos is the seventh day of the baby's life, that's not milah at all. You cannot, according to Rabbi Eliezer, define and consider that as a Tav B'dvar Mitzvah. Tav B'dvar Mitzvah means that what he was doing was a mitzvah. What do you mean? Unbeknown to him, what he was doing was not a mitzvah at all. That can't be Tav B'dvar Mitzvah. Rabbi Yeshua, on the other hand, says, well, what motivated him to circumcise the baby? It was the mitzvah of milah. And that's enough to give him a status of Tav B'dvar Mitzvah. Now, let's go back to Rabbi Meir. The Gemara is now saying that Rabbi Meir is identified with Rabbi Yeshua. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use the word identified. Let me choose a different word. That Rabbi Meir holds in I'm going to read this out loud. He says, "Shel das Rabbi Yeshua kol hatoeh b'dvar mitzvah kemo Rabbi Mila she'esavar molas hatinok shezmano b'Shabbos b'tol molas hatinok shezmano achar haShabbos." So this baby was meant to be circumcised on Sunday, and even in that case, Rabbi Yeshua considers him, when he circumcised the baby on Shabbos one day, a Tav B'dvar Mitzvah. And yet there's no mitzvah at all. It's Kodem Zmano. And yet Rabbi Yeshua says you're potter. Why? Because his kavanah was for the sake of a mitzvah. What brought him to circumcise this baby one day earlier, but nevertheless to circumcise the baby, was the kavanah l'shem mitzvah. And if that be the case here also, when a man thinks he's bringing his erusin to fruition in the su'id and having an intimate relationship with his wife, he has a kavanah l'shem mitzvah. He didn't do any mitzvah. On the contrary, he had a relationship with an Eishes Ish, with Eishes Achim, Achozishto, etc., etc. But nevertheless, he should be potter from chatas according to the view of Rabbi Yeshua, that any toes, when a person was miskaven l'shem mitzvah, does not generate a chiyuv chatas. So that's what the Gemara is saying right now. Aliba deman. It cannot be aliba. 1 second, Rabbi Yehuda. 1 second. Yeah, because it cannot be aliba to Rabbi Yeshua. According to Rabbi Yeshua, Tav B'dvar Mitzvah will apply because his kavanah was l'shem mitzvah, even though his asiyah was not an asiyah sa mitzvah, and shelo asa mitzvah klal. On the contrary, he had a relationship with Eishes Achim. So therefore, the Gemara says that if you're going to try to reconcile Rabbi Meir with Rabbi Yeshua, you're in trouble. Because then, since this man and kavanah l'shem mitzvah, he should be potter from chatas. And I'll leave it to Rabbi Eliezer. We have no choice but to assume that Rabbi Meir accepted the shita of Rabbi Eliezer, and Tavid Var Mitzvah, if lo asa mitzvah klal, is chayav korban chatas, and that fits like a glove with our case over here, where he was Tavid Var Mitzvah. And Rabbi Eliezer says that in that case, despite the fact that you were motivated l'shem mitzvah, but if you didn't do a mitzvah, you're chayav a korban. Here also, even though he had kavanah l'shem mitzvah, he didn't do the mitzvah, he's chayav a korban. If he had done a mitzvah, then that's the other case where Rabbi Eliezer concedes to Rabbi Yeshua that he's potter, namely where he did a milah on a Friday, baby on Shabbos, not on a Sunday, baby on Shabbos. So he did it on a Friday, baby on Shabbos. Then he did a mitzvah, and even Rabbi Eliezer would say he's potter from a chatas, even though he violated the Shabbos, but he's a Torah b'dvar mitzvah because he's a Torah b'dvar mitzvah v'asal mitzvah. But our case with the two brothers and two sisters, that's Torah b'dvar mitzvah v'lo asal mitzvah, and yet he's chayav chatas. That has to be Rabbi Eliezer. Because our case is not a case of Torah b'dvar mitzvah v'asa mitzvah, but rather Torah b'dvar mitzvah v'niskamei mitzvah v'lo asa mitzvah klal. And in such a case, Rabbi Eliezer says that you're chayav chatas. You're not considered a Torah b'dvar mitzvah. And again, on the side, that's where Rabbi Yeshua says it all depends on whether you had kavanah l'shem mitzvah. So that's going to patter you up from a chatas. But there's no way we can reconcile Rabbi Meir in our Mishnah with Rabbi Yeshua. We have to assume that whatever interpretation Rabbi Meir had in that Mishnah, it was always predicated on the Shita Rabbi Eliezer. That in our Mishnah, even though he was niskaven l'shem mitzvah, but he didn't implement the mitzvah at all. So in such a case, you're not considered a Torah b'dvar mitzvah because he was lo asa mitzvah and you're chayav chatas. That's our possibility of reconciling Rabbi Meir with our Mishnah. Because we have a vested interest in reconciling Rabbi Meir with our Mishnah because it's Rabbi Meir in the case of Yom Kippur and Shabbos who maintains that even in a case of that in a case of Vasachas you're chayav shtayim, and our Mishnah here is discussing a case of bevasachas. Because again, let's just go over this one more time. When Reuven marries Rachel, and at that moment, Rachel to Shimon is both an Eishes Ish and Eishes Om. And our Mishnah says he brings two chatos, reflecting the Shita of Rabbi Meir that even though both these Surim and Chal Basachas, nevertheless, we apply, I'm sorry, that since both Isurim are Chal Vasachas, therefore we cannot apply the principle of Ein Isur Chal Isur and Yechayiv Shtayim. But how do we reconcile our Mishnah with Rabbi Meir if Rabbi Meir would accept Rabbi Yeshua? Because here he's a Torah B'dvar Mitzvah, he would be part of it. And the answer must be that if you've already established the authorship of Mishnah is that of Rabbi Meir, it must be that Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Eliezer. And what's the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer? We restrict the application of Torah B'dvar Mitzvah Patur to a case of Asas Mitzvah. He did the Milah of a Ben Sheva. I'm sorry. He did the Milah of a Ben Tesha, I should call it, right? Because already on Friday he was a Ben Shmona. And if he circumcised him on Shabbos, that's a Torah B'dvar Mitzvah. Therefore, there is Osek B'mitzvah. But in our case, he's not a Torah, but the Osek B'mitzvah, meaning in the Asiyah itself is clearly has no shaykhs to the mitzvah at all. And in such a case, although Rabbi Yeshua would say since he had kavanah, he was motivated it's his part in a korban, but Rabbi Eliezer says he's chayav b'korban because the p'tur, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is the ma'aseh mitzvah. A ma'aseh mitzvah cannot generate a chiyuv korban. So whereas Rabbi Yeshua puts all the emphasis on his kavanah l'shem mitzvah to set up a p'tur of osek b'mitzvah, Rabbi Yeshua puts all his emphasis on kavanah, therefore he's part of, and Rabbi Eliezer says no, kavanah is not enough. You've got to be doing a mitzvah. So in the case of a tino whose milah should be on Sunday and he maled him on Shabbos, he's going to be chayav b'chatas, point to Rabbi Eliezer, because that milah is not a milah. And in the case of achad v'achios, that mitzvah of nesuin is out of the ballpark. He's not at all involved in the mitzvah of nesuin, and therefore the halacha is that he's chayav b'korban. So our Mishnah so far reflects a combination of two shittas that have to overlap here. We have to accept both of them. Rabbi Meir's shita that in the case of Asaka, we suspend the principle of Ein Isur Chal Isur, both Isur Machal. So that when Reuven marries Rachel, there are two different arayas that are engendered b'vasachas vis-a-vis Shimon, and Teishes Achiv and Eishes Ish, and the additional chiddush that since he's not implementing a mitzvah, therefore he's chayav b'korban chatas, and that reflects the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. Ibai Sema, the Olam Aliba the Rabbi Yeshua. And somehow, for some reason, we're going to suspend the principle of Torah B'dvar Mitzvah Patur. Rabbi Yeshua Torah B'dvar Mitzvah Patur Hani Mili Gavi Tinokos Dizmano Bo Aval Hai Kaven the Eitzmano Bo Lo. So again, Rabbi Yeshua, as opposed to Rabbi Eliezer, puts all the emphasis on kavanah. And Rabbi Yeshua is saying is that he has a kavanah which is l'shem mitzvah. But we have to add another element to the equation. His kavanah l'shem mitzvah creates behilus. He's bold. So the Rabbi Yeshua holds that it's not enough to say his kavanah was l'shem mitzvah to pater him up. You have to say that he was torrid b'dvar mitzvah. He was preoccupied with it. His mind was totally focused on the mitzvah. And that's called zmano bo. What creates this tirda and justifies, in a sense, his shogeg? It puts his shogeg into a different light. It's not even a chiyuv chatos. That's because mano bo. He's torud because mano bo. So that's typical of tinokos. Where there's a time urgency. The meal has to take place today. So that gives him a nervous tension. He's torrid b'mitzvah. And as a result of the tirda, he's pater from a chatos. We say he's a different level of shogeg. It's like almost shogeg karav leonis. Oh, now what about the man who's marrying in our Mishnah? Ein zmano bo. So Nisuin is a very unique mitzvah. It's ein zmano bo. Nothing is rushing. No urgency. Therefore, even Rabbi Yeshua would agree that if you don't have this additional element of zmano bohul and tirda, then he's chayav b'kol. So we could reconcile our Mishnah with Rabbi Yeshua. Is that clear? How do we reconcile our Mishnah with Rabbi Yeshua? Because in our Mishnah, it's not zmano bo. I don't think the Gemara is changing our understanding of Rabbi Yeshua fundamentally, meaning conceptually. I think in concept, we're still carrying the ball in the same direction. That Rabbi Yeshua is talking about something less than a regular shogeg. There's another element here. And what is that element? It's a tos b'dvar mitzvah. But now we're adding tirda plus tos. Well, maybe we could say that the tirda sort of justifies kaviyafol the tos. Why did he make this tos? Because he was torud. Again, it's not that he was torud for some financial loss. there's a crash on the stock markets, and it's Torah. But rather, he's Torah because of Dvar mitzvah. He's got to do the mitzvah now. If you subtract that element of Torah b'dvar mitzvah, and the tird is a result of the time urgency of zmano bo, then he becomes a shogeg, even according to Rabbi Yeshua. And he's chayav a korban. You can only take him out of the category of shogeg by adding to Torah b'dvar mitzvah that he's bol ala mitzvah. So the Gemara says, "Vari truma the ein zmano bohu." It's really interesting. I'm thinking to myself, there's a concept in Allah called bittul mitzvah. But I'm thinking to myself that bittul mitzvah would now subdivide into two categories. There's bittul mitzvah when it's mano bohu, and then there's death, which is bittul mitzvah in a case of ein mano bohu. You follow what I mean? In other words, in a case where it's ein mano bohu, he has the entire life until he, until they bury him to fulfill that mitzvah. He's never a mavatal mitzvah until he dies. It's only at the moment of his death that he becomes a mavatal mitzvah. Why? Because there's no time element to the mitzvah. So in theory, he can postpone the mitzvah till the very last day of his life. So we have the case of the Nisuin. Again, it's a little complicated because in the Nisuin, you have the element also period of Arivia. He can't wait till the end of his life. But let's say he's talking about here about Achilas Truma. Again, in Truma, eventually the Truma is going to spoil. It's going to rot. But that's a physical element. In terms of the inherent legal halachic element, he can wait till this Truma, put it in deep freeze, and if it doesn't get spoiled, and the modern methods of maintaining food, he can wait till the last day that he died. There's no element of bo in the mitzvah achilas truma. So therefore, according to everything that we've said now, in our attempt to reconcile our Mishnah of Achios, right, with Rabbi Yeshua Shita, then in the case of a zar who eats truma, and he thought that he had a mitzvah to eat the truma, let's say, for example, if he thought that his parents were legally married, and he's a Kohen, he had every reason to believe that it was a legal marriage according to halacha. And he went and he ate truma. So in his mind, he's fulfilling a mitzvah of achilas truma. As it turns out, Unfortunately, his mother was not suitable for kahuna, and his father married her illegally. And therefore, he's a cholol. He can't eat the son of this illegal marriage. And he went ahead and he ate truma. So there's no element of time urgency in the mitzvah of Kohen eating truma. And therefore, he should be chai b'karma. And yet, by truma the ain't man of bol upotar ukapotar of Yeshua. This nan haya ochel b'truma v'nodalo ben grucha ben chalutza. Rabbi Eliezer mechayiv keren v'chomesh. Rabbi Yeshua poter. So Yeshua applies the principle of Toeh b'dvar mitzvah to a case of a Kohen who's possible to truma, and unbeknown to him, he had every reason to believe that he is a regular Kohen, a kosher Kohen, and he has a mitzvah to truma. That's called otzek b'mitzvah. That's called Toeh b'dvar mitzvah. And Rabbi Yeshua applies his principle of Toeh b'dvar mitzvah here, and he patters up the Kohen from being a carbon. But again, Rabbi Yeshua is putting all the emphasis on his kavanah. His kavanah was l'kayim mitzvahs achilas truma. And again, this mitzvah is ein lo zman kavua, so you can't add the element of bahu. And yet, Rabbi Yeshua applies the principle of Toeh b'dvar mitzvah pot. I'm just wondering, I'm thinking out loud if you don't mind. There's ritual law and there's monetary. I mean, in the case that we dealt with earlier of Shabbos, and he violated the Shabbos thinking that he was Mekayim a mitzvah, because he thought that this baby was 8 days old today on Shabbos, and he went and he circumcised him. That's where Rabbi Yeshua says, here's what I want to say. That in ritual law, when you violated an Iser Kares or an Iser Skila in the case of Shabbos B'Shogeg, Rabbi Yeshua would agree, he would concede to Rabbi Eliezer that in order to generate a p'tur, you need bohu. But in Truma, even though there's no bohu, Rabbi Yeshua would say you're potter for a different reason. And that is the Torah's Masechet. Here we're not dealing with ritual law, we're dealing with compensation. So if I was of the mindset, in my thinking, I'm doing this act, which is going to, at the end, damage you, and you're going to suffer a monetary loss, but I'm doing it for the sake of a mitzvah, I'm potter from tashlum. I don't have to pay compensation. Not because of Tav B'Dvar Mitzvah. Tav B'Dvar Mitzvah is a different category. That's a question of, do you bring a carbon? Do you not bring a carbon? To what extent was there an element here of a shogeg hamachayev carbon? And the answer is, you were bold. So if you were bold, then that mitigates to some extent your level of guilt. But I don't need to add that condition of bold in a case where I am compensating you for your loss because I was an Odom Hamaz. So, for example, let's say you're a Kohen. Here's Truma. I think I'm a Kohen, and I went ahead and ate that Truma. As a result, you lost that Truma. But I thought I was doing a mitzvah because I thought I was a Kohen. So therefore, if you want to sue me for damages, I can say, wait a minute, I'm totally guiltless here. I thought I was doing a mitzvah. And in that context, I don't need bo to generate a patur. Yeah, so I'm just thinking out loud. The Gemara has a different answer. The Gemara says, "Ha'itmar Allah, Omra baby barabaye, hacha b'truma the erev Pesach askina dizmana bo." So we're talking about a chametz issue here. And this truma has to be eaten immediately. Normally, when it's a truma, take your time. The day before you die, you'll eat the truma. But not on erev Pesach. On erev Pesach, you better eat the truma now, because if you don't, then you'll have to burn it as chametz. So your chova, your obligation in truma is to guarantee that it's eaten and not destroyed by fire. And in order to do so, you have to immediately eat the truma at erev Pesach. You've got another hour before we're going to burn it. So Yeshua is going to say that in this case, he's called a Tav B'Dvar Mitzvah. He's bold because the Iser of Shmiras Truma Shelo Tifase is Torah. It generates the status of Torah. So it's not like I wanted to suggest that maybe you don't need Torah in this case. You're potter because it's tashlum, and I don't have to pay tashlum. And if I think I'm doing a mitzvah, I think I'm a kohen and I'm doing a mitzvah. The Gemara is saying something different. The Gemara is saying that the normal requirement and condition of Rabbi Yeshua for potter b'dvar mitzvah of Tarut, of Baul, applies. And the reason he's potter here is because he's Tarut b'dvar mitzvah, because it's a case of erev Pesach. What I find odd here, and it's a little bit uncomfortable, is that we're starting with the Mishnah Trumas, and you're telling me that the Mishnah Trumas omitted one little detail. What was that little detail? That we're talking about erev Pesach. Give it a break. It should have been a footnote, at least in the Mishnah. We're talking about Truma erev Pesach, and you completely omit that. That's it's a bit unsatisfying. I don't feel so comfortable. Now, by the way, here's an interesting question. A Kohen who's a cholol, meaning his mother is a grusha, father's going, his mother's, and he went and he did the avoda in the mikveh. She's possible avoda. He's a cholol. Is the avoda completely psula? That's something I covered in my, I have a shir. Oh, you're with me in that shir, the introductory shir in Kodshim, and I think we said that b'di'evid, since he is a born Kohen, albeit disqualified, his avodah is ksheira. Meaning, in this case of Truma, where the zar, where he's only a zar because his mother's a grusha, which makes him a cholol, but he is still a Kohen. What does it say there? Poel Yadav, I forgot the end of the post, Yirtza or something like that. That the evidence is avodas ksheira. Here he ate truma. Is this achil of truma completely devoid of any kiyum mitzvah? Why should it be different than if the Kohen who's a cholol went ahead and he did the avod in the mikdash? And I think with the evidence we pass in his avodas ksheira. So here too, even though he's a cholol, his achilas truma is a kiyum of mitzvah achilas truma. Again, mechatchila, he's not allowed to do so. But post facto, it is a mitzvah. But again, the Gemara is not going with that approach, because the Gemara is saying that he is a toeh b'dvar mitzvah, but he's bovel. It's not that he's potter from Tashlumei Truma, Karen Mechomesh, because he did a mitzvah by eating the truma. No. There's no mitzvah. The Achilah is completely devoid of a mitzvah, but his kavanah was l'shem mitzvah, and he was bovel because it was Erev Pesach. Iboy Seima, the Iser Bas Achas, Valiba the Rabbi Shimon. So we said that in our Mishnah, we're going to apply the principle of Iser Chalal Iser. In the case of Iser Mosif, in the case of Iser Kolel. So now the Gemara is saying, no, our Mishnah is talking about a case of Iser B'Vasachas. We're not talking about Iser Kolel or Iser Mosif. It's all because of Vasachas. I'll leave it to Rav Shimon. That means that although Rabbi Shimon holds that ain't Iser Chal in Kolel or Mosif, but he admits, he concedes that if the two Isurim emerge from Vasachas, then we cannot say ein Iser Chal Iser and choose one over the other, but rather both Isurim are Chal. And that was the case of Malika, am I right? I hope he's going to point that out. No, he doesn't point that out. Do you have any note over there in your... I'll leave it to Rav Shimon. Does he mention Malika?
Doesn't say it.
He doesn't say it, but I think that's what he's referring to. Rav Shimon will admit that in the case of Malika, he's chayav shtayim, because that's a case of asa'as. So Gemara says the following: Bishlem akulu mishkachaslu. You can have vasachas. The shavinu shliach. So these two brothers appointed a shliach, v'shavu inu shliach, and the two sisters also appointed a shliach. Paga shliach b'shliach. So therefore, all the surim achal b'vasachas. Right, there was a marriage of two sisters to two brothers b'vasachas. Yeah, but what are we going to do about nida? So the second, ela nidos heichim mishkachas lo. That's our question. So the Gemara is getting out to try to give a, somersault in the air, like you remember what we spoke about the Shtei Sarah's case, to try to figure out if in Nida we can have the Iser Erev of Nida, the Chiv Kares of Nida, emerge simultaneous with the marriage. Amar of Amram Amar Rav. B'shofas mitoch shloshasar li'achar shloshasar. Oh, well. Okay, so we're talking about two brothers on their bar mitzvah day. And she became a nida technically before the bar mitzvah. But she still had a riyas dam over the period of time that covers exactly the bar mitzvah. Are we talking about twin boys? Yeah, well. Do you have the case?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about
it. They do mention twins? So these twins are both going to reach bar mitzvah at the same time, more or less. And during that time period, from T1 to T2, when the two of them became bar mitzvah, she would shofas. Lachyuve inhu. So it means that both brothers became chayef and nida on the day that they reached the Gimel. Second. So again, the two shluchim met each other at a certain time. And what happened? And I don't get it. So when exactly did they become Gedolim? You have a note there?
on what day.
No, exactly. I'm trying to figure out we're working with 4 different Isuri Erva that all were Chal B'Vasachas. And the fourth of them is Nida. So in order to do this again, we have to go back to the moment of Bar Mitzvah. So what exactly happened at the moment of Bar Mitzvah? The two Shluchim met each other right at that moment? In other words, I understand how the Eastern Nida could be chal on both brothers, B'Vasachas. But don't we have to also coordinate it with the other three arayos? No, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe my cheshbon is not correct. And so what I mean is the nidachal simultaneous with the other three arayos? The other three arayos are chayav emerge with the kiddushin, meaning when the shliach of the brothers gives money to the shliach of the isha. So when of the two achas, so when their shliach, I should say, receives money from the males, right, the brothers shliach, and at that point she became a nida,
or even before, through that time.
Uh-huh. I'll just read this. He says, Shofas dam nida mitoch nas shlosha sar kono shemilu liachim yudgimel shan v'adayno yuktanu ad liachar shesholma shnas shlosha srei shela achim v'gdilu v'zeh tam l'chiyuvei inu l'chiyuv ha'achim שבאופן זה מסחייבים האחים ביום שגדלו ונהיו בני י"ג בכל איסורים אלו, כיוון ששפכו דם נידוס כיוון ששפכו דם נידוס בזמן שגדלו בבעלים ונמצא שחלו עליהם, חלו עליהם כל האיסורים בבסחס. צריך לומר שבאוסו יום שגדלו האחים ונהיו בני י"ג נעשו האחיוס או בנוס י"ב. Why is that? נמצא ששפכו דם מתוך 12 ל-12 לאחר 12. Do you understand that? Why is the Gemara insisting that these two sisters started seeing Dam before their 12th birthday, and it continued flowing until after their 12th birthday? Why is that critical? Because when we calculated 4 times 4 chatos, we were calculating the 4 chatos of each of the two sisters. So those also should have emerged with us. He writes the following, Kigon, Shenoldu Shnei Ha'achim Bi'echad B'Tishrei B'Shana Achas. Yeah, I think you'd have to say they were twins. L'Shana Acheres Bi'echad B'Tishrei. Again, Achad B'Tishrei, I'm not sure. Okay, Noldu Shnei Ha'achas. Also Yom Sheyimlu Achios Yud Beis Shana Lulei Dasam. We also Yom Yimlu Achim Yud Beis Shana Lulei Dasam. We have a day on which we celebrate 2 bar mitzvahs and 2 bat mitzvahs. That's going to cost a lot. We cater. Umasru Achim Bo B'Yom Yedushin L'Shtei Nashim Elu V'Shafu Achios Dam Nida Misof Shnas Yud Beis Lei Dasam Sof Shnas Yud Gimel V'nimtza shehigiu habanos legadlus b'tchilas shnas yud gimel shalahem. Oh, he says b'tchilas shnas yud gimel, meaning they passed their 12th birthday. Once you pass your 12th birthday, you're into the 13th year. Right, when they pass 13, going towards 14, right, maybe that day into the 14th year. Oh, and he says, Lefisha Isurim Elu Tluyim Bitfisas HaKiddushin, V'chalos HaKiddushin Toli V'gadlutzah. L'chein Chegadlu V'tosu HaKiddushin, Shemosru Lahem Itchila, Chalu Aleim B'osa Shah, Kol HaIsurim Alol. V'chein Isur Nida, Afshich Oyu, Shofos, Kodem Zman, Gadlus, Mikomakwa, Isachal Rak B'Shashe Gdilu, Fisha Kodem Ktana, Einom B'nei Mitzvahs, L'chein Chalos HaIsur, and in this case, Nida, Nikva L'Fishas Gdulasa. Harei L'fanenu Ofen Shiachulu Kol Adalat HaIsur Malach Nachis Bios. Like I say, it's like somersaults in the air, but it's like very similar to the Gemara we had earlier about Shtei Sarah. Okay, so this leads us to Mafrishin Osan. Which we'll pick up near Hashem.